Hey friends, it's Jasmine, and I hope that you all are doing well. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I am a witchy content creator here on YouTube, and I vlog about my personal practice, Covenry, and just all types of things. I'm also on other platforms as well, which are listed in the description bar of this video if you would like to catch me elsewhere. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much for coming back. It's good to see you here. I really appreciate all the love and all the support. It really means the world to me. In today's video, I kind of want to touch on a topic that I wrote about in my book, Ambrosia's Book of Witchflight, which is also listed down below in the description. But I've gotten some feedback from some people who have read the book who have wanted me to make this video and kind of elaborate a little bit more on what I call the 6 virtues. So in my book, it's very much a book of UPG, or unverified personal gnosis, which I'm finding that some of this gnosis is not inherently unverified. It's kind of also like SPG, or shared personal gnosis. So it's been really cool getting feedback from those of you who have been reading the book and sending me messages, leaving reviews or comments, letting me know what you think of the work and how much of it actually overlaps in your own practice. This concept of the virtues is not completely original to my own craft. There are many different paths that recognize terrestrial and cosmic virtues. So what I mean by that is, to me, the elements of earth, air, fire, and water are inherently terrestrial, meaning like of this world, of this realm. But the cosmic virtues are something otherworldly, and they can bleed into this world just like our terrestrial virtues can bleed into the other world as well. Both cosmic and terrestrial virtues can very much be harnessed and utilized by skilled practitioners. I'm going to read you a little bit from my book here. The other world is home to the epicenters of the cosmic virtues of primordial energy. The 6 virtues are chaos, order, life, death, light, and darkness. They influence our terrestrial elements of earth, air, fire, and water. The element of spirit connects these virtues and elements much like a web, and every strand in that web is part of one sublime whole. Each of these virtues exist in our physical world as well. As witches, we can tap into these powers and use them as a resource in our practice. You may feel an affinity towards one particular virtue, but all 6 are needed for balance in the craft. For example, if we lack the virtue of chaos, then order can become a prison. Without death, life will consume itself into oblivion. Light practitioners can easily become blinded by the same light that they wield. In excess, any of these virtues can become corrupting. This is why balance is so critical. I have seen firsthand practitioners of death and chaos lose themselves to the insanity of the void. The void is naturally a corruptive force and will find its way in any crack in the lay. Void is a virtue as much as any of the others, but utilizing it will always lead to corruption. It is inescapable, such is the nature of the void. Much like witches, the virtues have affinities to certain elements as well. For example, death and water are often intertwined in mythology. Not only do we see boatmen ferrying spirits across the rivers of the underworld, but portals are often found in water. We give water to our beloved and our mighty dead as offerings. Fire has a strong connection with light, as fire creates light in its natural state. Fire is chaos unburdened by the hand of man. Life needs the virtue of order because without it, chaos will influence life to eat itself. Air is also associated with light as it represents the heavens. The Eastern association is a nod at the sun, which is light, rising in the east. Darkness, however, is synonymous with the watery depths of the abyss and the black fertile soil of the earth. I encourage you to think about other ways the elements and the virtues relate to each other and influence each other. How do you perceive the virtues? Do you feel as though you have an affinity towards any specific virtue? Could you call on those affinities now? Draw your own correspondence between them and take note of it. And then I have a quote here in the book from a spirit from the other world. Witches stand in the center and call forth the power of the elements and virtues to manipulate and wield them to work their will. So that is just kind of a short passage from the 6 virtues chapter in my book. And I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. I think that for myself, and I think for a lot of other practitioners too, we can find ourselves identifying with maybe one or more elements at any given time. And I also think it's perfectly okay if those elements switch around. For myself, I really strongly identify with air and with water. Those are the 2 elements that I feel the most drawn to. And maybe part of that is because my ruling planet for my sun sign is Venus, and my zodiac sun is Libra, so that correspondent would be air. Maybe it has to do with sort of like the first pillar and the pursuit of knowledge and the Venusian arts, like maybe it has to do with that. Or, you know, for water, my ruling planet is Neptune, and I've always very much kind of had an affinity for the songs of the siren. Now, water as an element in my practice, I've definitely come to have a deeper appreciation for as I've been practicing now, because early on, water was an element that I just didn't really understand. I had a lot of respect for water, but I didn't really connect with in the same way that I do now. I get a lot of feedback from people that they're surprised that fire is not an element that I strongly associate with. And I love fire too. I mean, really, I love all of the elements, but actually I have very little, next to no fire in my natal chart entirely, which I feel like surprises some people, but fire is kind of absent in my chart, which that happens sometimes. If you're looking at your own chart and you notice that you have an overabundance of one or a lack of another element, that's also something powerful to read into for yourself in terms of natal astrology. Earth has been an element that I have kind of had a back and forth relationship with most of my practice. I love Earth. I love the aesthetics of like that fairy cottagecore, earthy sort of vibe. And I love earth tones. I love green witchery and like horticulture and planting and herbal medicine and the poison path. But it's been an element that I have found myself having to sort of go to myself, as opposed to I feel like air kind of comes to me just naturally. You know what I mean? For myself, out of the virtues, I feel very drawn to death, as I'm sure many others of you who are watching this also feel a connection to death. But I also feel a connection to order as well. I think that order is a really powerful virtue, and one that I find sometimes is just not as fashionable or like alluring, right? Because like it's structure and it's like routine. The virtue of order to me very much reminds me of the planet Saturn and some of the rigidity and like the structure and like the routine that Saturn can bring into our lives when we work with that planetary energy. And I know that for myself, it's very easy for me to fall into the virtue of chaos and to allow chaos and death to just kind of consume me and my life. And maybe some of that comes just from like my own sort of soul, my own personality, feeling very drawn to the unpredictability of chaos and the excitement and the rush that chaos can bring, and also the transformative and liminal powers that the virtue of death can bring. But in times in my practice where I have not kept death and chaos in an equal balance in my life, I find myself participating in more self-destructive behaviors and activities. And I feel like the opposites to some of that is actually sort of like life and order, because the opposite of death is life and the opposite of chaos is order. So I feel like in order to bring more of a well-rounded aspect into my craft, I should seek to bring in energies of order and energies of life, which makes me feel like I should be working with the element of earth more in my practice. Maybe that's gonna be what kind of helps ground some of my like restless and wild feral spirit. I don't know. But that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, were the 6 virtues and looking at these virtues as energy resources for us to siphon and use as witches in our practice to better our own lives and also the lives of others. I would love to hear what you think of these virtues and what virtues you find yourself having a natural affinity for. Do you feel super drawn to death? Do you feel drawn to chaos? Do you feel similar to me, where maybe we need to bring in a little bit more order and a little bit more life energy into our practice? Or do you disagree? I would love to know what you think. So the 7th virtue is kind of a virtue, but it's not a virtue, and that would be the void. And I know that this is also kind of a little bit controversial. I know that I have some good friends in real life and online that work with the void, and I do not, so I'm not going to speak from that sort of experience. But what I will speak to is what I've seen in my own life, just in general, in the other world, and how the spirits have kind of portrayed to me how the void is seen. The void is more like a corruption of a virtue. The void is not chaos. The void is also not death. Some people, I feel like, kind of mix the void and chaos up or associate the void with death. But I feel like the void is truly the oblivion. It's nothingness, and it's consumption, and it's corruption, which to me is very different than death, and it's very different than chaos. Death to me is transformative powers of alchemy. It's the end of one cycle, beginning of another. Death to me is that essence of liminality, an ending of life. Chaos to me is about unpredictability and endless opportunities. It's more of like a schism of power that just is and just spits things out. Versus the void to me is more like when we have virtues that are in excess, they can become corrupted by the void. And if you are a World of Warcraft player or a nerd, then you will know, like, corrupted by the void is kind of definitely like a super nerdy plotline. But I also think that it applies to magic. When I see people that are so far one direction or another, it can be very easy to get lost in that excess, regardless of how conventionally positive it seems to be. Kind of like I talked about in the book, like too much order, and that creates a prison. Literally. And too much light can be literally blinding and uplifting of zealotry and ego. I've talked about this on the channel before too, but I feel like it kind of plays into the sort of concept of like left-hand path, right-hand path sort of practitioners. I think that when you go too far in one direction or the other, even as a practitioner that definitely leans more towards the left, I think that that's where corruption can kind of come into play. I can't tell you how many friends or practitioners I've known who had really lost themselves into this aspect of darkness or chaos, and then the void started to kind of grow and consume them. And I think that's what can happen when apotheosis is taken in a really dangerous direction. Similarly, how many quote unquote light workers have you seen that are just so completely and utterly delusional and blinded by the light and filled with like raw ego? And I'm not one to say that we should completely get rid of the ego or destroy the ego either, but I do think that it should be kept in balance. So I don't really consider the void as a virtue because I see it more as the corruption of a virtue. But if you feel differently, I would love to hear what you think about the void, working with the void, and how you feel like it has benefited you. I'm genuinely curious. Like, that's what I want to have in the comments, is like sincere discussion. And it's okay if we see things differently. I just love hearing other practitioners' perspective. I hope that you all are doing well, and until next time, blessed be, and I will see you in hell.